Hello, welcome back to the library, or in this case, the Polymega Journal. So we return with an episode I've wanted to do for a long time, and that is discussing the controllers, specifically the retro controllers. Now I reviewed them a while back individually on the original real hardware, but now that I finally have all the modules in-house, I would like to discuss a cool little feature. Now, if you're still unfamiliar with Polymega, the base system plays a whole bunch of different CD games. But you can buy retro element modules. And when you plug them in, you can then plug in your Super Nintendo, your Nintendo, Genesis cartridges, copying to the system. And then once you're done, you don't really need the module all that much unless you want to use the original controllers. Or if you want to use those controllers on other systems. Now, I've had mine for about 2 years now, and I've been using the TurboGrafx module, as that was the only one I had originally, using the 6-button controller for fighting games like Street Fighter Alpha 3 and the like, and it's fantastic. So now that I have all the controllers and all the modules, I jump back and see what works well across the spectrum. Let's get to it. So first up, we're going to talk about the Nintendo 64 controller, as that was the one I had plugged in when I started testing all this. In the previous journal entry, I mentioned how it works great for nights, but what I didn't imply, to save it for this episode, is just how well it works with other Saturn games as the 3D controller. I tested a bunch of games at random, and here, so far, is what I found. For Burning Rangers, it actually works great, but that Nintendo 64 specific gap between the camera buttons and the B&A might throw some people off in the heat of action. It wasn't that bad, though. In Contra, it feels fantastic, especially the analog stick. And the smaller buttons allow you to have jump and shoot on just your thumb. No need to actually move back and forth. Daytona USA Circuit Edition, the shoulder buttons feel nice in place of the analog legs on the original controller, but the analog might be too tight. Just little itty bitty baby movements on the analog stick will help you along the way, otherwise you just spin out. As stated before, it works wonderfully in nights, so no need to go back to there. I then jumped to Duke Nukem 3D. It is smooth as butter on that analog stick. Oh my god, it was so fun to play with this controller, guys. Even the smaller thumb buttons on the C camera area didn't do much to deter that fun. I can highly recommend it with this controller. Sega Rally, I just suck at rally games, so I can assure you, it does work well. Just ignore me bouncing off the walls if you see it here. Now, with the N64 controller, in regards to the Saturn, there is a small little hiccup, but that's not Polymega's fault. When you start a Saturn game with the N64 controller, before you even get to the main menu, you're going to have to go to the Polymega's in-game menu and turn the analog on, and it'll automatically reset the game with the analog stick on. The reason it has to do this is on real Saturn 3D controllers, there was a little on-off switch so you could actually leave it on even when it was turned off, and it would just automatically default to analog mode. Unfortunately, the N64 was always in analog mode, so you have to tell it if you want the D-pad or analog on the Polymega. Just a little thing, but nothing to worry about. Going back to the TurboGrafx controller, the Sega Genesis controller has a bit of infamy around these parts, as when I first got the original controller, I discovered there was something wrong in the molding of the controller underneath the circuit pad. And in trying to rock the D-pad back and forth, you could hear this horrible cracking sound. And then it had no bottom left diagonals. It was pretty bad. However, I had a quick fix solution that made it work wonderfully. Well, now that I got the actual Genesis module with the controller, I can say that Polymega fixed the issue, and right out of the box, the controller is buttery smooth in its roll. It's super quiet. It's really nice. However, there may be a new issue, but it's not a permanent issue. It's just a time-based one. In going to do this video and testing out that newer controller, I was still having problems with getting the bottom left diagonal to work, but only in fighting games. It worked wonderful in like Final Fight CD and other random just normal Sega CD games, but it was just fighting games. Until about 10 minutes in, as you'll see on the footage here, suddenly I could throw diagonals like they were nothing, like just one right after the other. And what I think the current problem is that on the newer Genesis controllers, the membrane that sits between the plastic D-pad and the circuit board, that might be a bit too rigid coming straight from the factory. However, after I think it was like 10, 20 minutes of playing back and forth, it started to give a little and I could consistently do the fireballs. So if you have a Genesis controller, especially from the Element Module, just give it a little bit of time and it'll wear itself in. There is one thing I noticed though that was kind of weird. While I could do it fine in like Saturn fighting games and PlayStation fighting games, I couldn't get it to work on the Super Nintendo. Like playing Killer Instinct, it would not do a diagonal to save its life. It was really weird. I think that's more of just a weird compatibility between the Genesis and the Super Nintendo than the actual Polymega controller. Now, I've saved the last two because they're my favorite, and it just blows me away. If you watched my original retro controller review, you know that I love their Nintendo 8-bit controller. The movement of the start and select to the top of the controller completely changes the way you hold it and access the start button for games like Batman on the NES or other games. It gives you all three buttons across your thumb with a natural ergonomic feel. It's fantastic, and the D-pad itself is absolutely wonderful. So I got curious, and I threw it on the TurboGrafx. So instead of using the 6 button, which is based off the Japanese Avenue pad, I'm using the NES controller, which is now like the original TurboGrafx controller, just without the turbo buttons. And it is perfect. I was playing Ninja Spirits for far longer than I had to for this video footage because it's just that comfortable. Highly recommend it. And lastly, probably the biggest surprise in doing the cross-platform testing, the Super Nintendo is bleeping phenomenal for Neo Geo CD games. And I don't mean just because of the 4-button layout matches the Neo CD controller. The D-pad and the plastic grips on the bottom of the controller shell are amazing for fighting games. I was playing Samurai Showdowns, I was playing Breakers, I was playing King of Fighters, and every move landed. Every fireball, every uppercut, it was so much fun to use. And I'm not going to lie, I've actually had the TG module plugged in forever because I like the 6 button. I might just start playing more Neo CD and leave the Super Nintendo one plugged in because that controller with the Neo CD games is absolutely phenomenal. I cannot recommend it enough. Now, obviously, the extra shoulder buttons won't do anything because those didn't exist on the Neo Geo CD controller. And you will have some other minor quirks. One of them being in Nintendo 64 MK Trilogy, you can't access the menu because the Polymega's alternate menu is up plus start. So you're stuck with the default settings in MK Trilogy for a while until they change that. But other than that, the controller, I love their retro controllers. They're really, really good. And it warms my heart that they were able to fix the problems with the Genesis controller. All of that aside, the wife and my brother-in-law actually found a whole bunch of more classic games in their attic, and we brought those home and I installed more N64 games. And I think Polymega is patching them on the fly because you need an internet connection to download the patches in real time as the game boots, but I believe it's then stored on the system. And some of the weird quirks I experienced in Majora's Mask, which was originally the only game we had, I'm no longer experiencing. And of the games we had, Diddy Kong Racing, Mario Kart, MK Trilogy, Mario Party, and there's one more I can't remember. They all played really good and really well, and they looked just like their N64 counterpart with all the dithering and the smooth options. And I gotta admit, so far, I'm pretty impressed. What is interesting is MK Trilogy's sound is really quiet, but I think that's how it was on the original. I remember not being a fan of the N64 originally when it came out. But yeah, that's the update for this week. Just playing a little more games, relaxing. You can tell I have a little bit of a sinus infection going on. But now that I have all the modules in-house, I'm finally seeing the true vision of Polymagi with the Polymega, and it's going to be a good future. And I believe at the point this video finally hits, they should finally have walk-in copies available on their website for people to buy, if not very soon after this. So check it out. It's absolutely fantastic. Now, more importantly, I got some big news. I will be at Midwest Gaming Classic, but as an actual guest of Eric from Tesseract over on Twitch. We are going to be on the bonus stage Saturday afternoon, I think around 2:30, just discussing how much we love classic gaming stuff as far as like physical demo discs, guidebooks, and magazines and all the like. So if you're going to Midwest Gaming Classic, stop by the panel. We'll see you there. Take care, you guys. Have a good one.